Welcome to another episode of the Almost Awakened podcast. I am one of your hosts, Bill Reel.
And I am Teresa Hobbs, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're here to have a good conversation. We'd plotted out some things to talk about, and then some things have gone on the last day or so, and we thought it would actually plays into the same topic, and we'll see where this conversation goes. We actually have no idea about where this will go, but I think it'll be helpful if I maybe set the stage this way. I'm going to add this to the screen. I used to be Mormon. I, of course, left, and everyone who listens, 95% of the people who listen to this will know that. But so I think Mormonism is not legitimate in that its truth claims don't hold up. It's not a true religion. It's to some degrees, and some of those degrees are really strong. It's what I would call a cult or a high demand fundamentalist religion, if you want to say it nicer. And there's very little religious truth in the historical narrative of Mormonism. In fact, in the history, I think there's very little that's redeemable in terms of a spiritual system that is effective at getting us back to God. But I do find things in Mormonism useful. I say all that to say this. I do find things in Mormonism useful. There are things from time to time that I'm like, man, that really gave me something. And examples, one on the screen, but the one that comes to mind is that Mormonism is what equipped me to be a public speaker, to be able to sit in front of people or stand in front of people and to talk for periods of time without being extremely nervous. One of the other cool things is the thing on the screen. It's a quote by Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith said, "By proving contraries, truth is made manifest." And I have no idea what he exactly meant by that, but the way I take it to mean is that there are lots of things in this world that are true that contradict each other. And it is by sitting in those contraries, it is by pushing them to their logical limits, to talking about how they affect us emotionally, talking about how people are impacted by doing life, showing up in life one way versus showing up another. And it's in sitting in those conversations, those tensions, those spaces where contradictory truths, or at least potential contradictory truths, are placed up against each other, that real truth, I don't mean like capital T true for all of us, I just mean truth that is true to our internal structures and how we think about the world, how we process things, that we learn truth. It's like reading a good book and you learn something about how humans interact with each other, and that book was helpful at you furthering your understanding about what it means to be a human being and how humanity plays out. So in proving contraries, truth is made manifest. And the thing we were going to come to talk to today, Teresa, we were going to have a conversation in front of the audience about politics, left and right. And I think we may still get to parts of that today as we have this conversation. But we were hoping to lay out why people on the left feel the way they do and why they're frustrated by people on the right. Why people on the right feel the way they do and why they're frustrated with people on the left. And both sides are often talking to each other as if it's clear that one of them is right and the other is just deadly wrong, when the reality is that almost certainly those two different sides both have truth. They come to that moment having different value systems, different values. They come to that moment having had a different life experience, different biology, different traumas. And that will often play out in how they value what they value, how they prioritize one side of the conversation or the other. And it's easy just to be on one side and decide that the other side is bad and wrong and dumb and ignorant and uninformed and all of the things we do. But another cool experiment can happen if we just sit with it and sort of get to know what the other side thinks. And so then, and again, you can jump in at any moment and say whatever, but now I want to tell the audience that part of the reason why we're sitting down right now is because of what's happened in the last 24 hours. And I do multiple shows. Almost Awakened is not the only one. So if you're listening to this channel, but this is the only show you listen to, this happened on a different program. And I was having a conversation with I'll say Mormon apologist. I don't think they would define themselves that way, but I would put that label out there because I think it explains, at least in part, what's going on. But I'm having a conversation with a LDS apologist, a Mormon apologist. And an apologist isn't somebody who apologizes. It's actually quite the opposite. An apologist, their responsibility is to take problematic issues to the religion and explain to people the workaround or the way in which to reconcile that problem. So they are there to help someone who has a doubt or a conundrum in the faith figure out how they can maintain their faith and still acknowledge the facts around whatever it is that happened. So I'm in a conversation with this person, and we're talking about a very specific issue in Mormonism where Joseph Smith, the founder of the faith, the documentary history shows that he had numerous young women or teenage girls from the ages of about 16 to the age of about 22. And these were not just one or two, this was 7, 8, 9 of them. And Smith gets each of these girls, young women, to end up working in his home where then he's now secured close proximity. He's isolated them away from family, and he begins implementing what I can't call anything else other than grooming techniques that he utilizes to initiate intimate relationships with these children and young women. And he's in his, it's 1842 when a lot of this is happening. But some of it's earlier and some of it's later. But 1842 for the majority of it. He's born in 1805, so I think that puts us at 37 years old. So 37 years old, and with 14-year-old, and he's with women as young as 14, 15, but the girls in his home are age 16 to 22. Some of these women, girls, he isolates them away from their family by sending the dad on a mission, promising to take care of them as his own kids. And so I'm in this conversation with an apologist last night, and I ask him directly, because I started off with a different question and I was trying to be much more gentle. I wanted to just leave some room, but also hoping that side will at least acknowledge some of my reality and some of my pain or difficulty with a church that presented itself to me as being the one true church on the earth, but it obscured from me, withheld from me, hid from me that Joseph Smith, its founder, was not only a polygamist, which it didn't tell me, but it also didn't tell me that he had carried out predatory techniques on children and young women and abused them in what I think any professional in the field of child abuse and sexual abuse would agree that predatory techniques were used and that abuse on multiple levels occurred.
Well, and can I just jump in here and compare this to essentially what Joseph Smith did back then is equal to what Warren Jeffs did today. So anyone in this day and age who has, heard the story of Warren Jeffs and his predatory techniques and his grooming behaviors, and essentially what he did is the same. And nobody would have said that was legitimate or okay. And they can look at him and recognize that he's a cult leader and a criminal and all these kinds of things. So I just want to make that comparison.
And I think another comparison that's fair is Jeffrey Epstein, who brought underage children, teenagers, into his home, and often his partner, Ghislaine Maxwell. The two of them would test these girls' boundaries, would use grooming techniques which break down their walls. We all have an intuitiveness about what is right for us or wrong for us. And often what sexual abusers do is gaslight us in ways or trick our system in ways as to not trust ourselves. I think Epstein's a great comparison for Smith as well. And so I'm having this conversation where I ask this person, would you allow your 14-year-old daughter, and it's a question I go to all the time in conversations with apologists, because it gets right to the heart of it, of whether the person will meet me in the historical facts, and whether that person will meet me with empathy towards a situation where people both in the past and in the present are being hurt and abused. And it gets right to it. So I've used it over and over again. And I asked this person that question: would you let a 14-year-old daughter of yours reside in the Smith home? And this person,
It's okay. It's okay.
No, I'm not mad or anything. This person responded with trying to not answer the question directly. And they've got their reasons. And if they were sitting here in this conversation, they would tell you that they weren't being avoidant, that this is just a really nuanced issue, and they would need to articulate it with lots of words and never be able to answer my question directly. But I kept pushing, and I'm triggered by these conversations because I feel deeply lied to, betrayed, and harmed by this religion. And I work every day in the space of sitting with others and articulating conversations that benefit others who feel the same. And when that conversation was over, this person felt that I had ran them over, that I wasn't a good faith actor, that I was, in essence, I think both their words and how I perceived what they were saying and what they were describing, they described as an asshole. And it's an interesting thing because I came on today. I know I'm stammering here a little bit, but I think this will make for a great conversation, which is that we came here today to have a conversation about how you hold space for the other side. And in these moments, I am struggling like hell to hold space for the other side. And I think it's an interesting thing to sit here and have a conversation around why these things happen. Because in politics, it's ugly. The right thinks the worst kind of things of the left, and the left thinks the worst kind of things on the right. And the politicians all seem yucky, full of ego, and are playing on that divisiveness and utilizing it to create sound bites for themselves and to shore up their voting base. And yet you and I, the people on the ground, boots on the ground folks who just living their daily lives, we just need a way to think about the things on the right and the things on the left, not worried about who wins the argument, but about where the truth is that most resonates with us. And in our effort to also respect others' autonomy, safety, respecting others' own needs and priorities in their life? How do we think about all the issues that are out there from all the sides, not even just two of them, certainly not one, and weigh the truth of what is beneficial to us and the people we care about and the strangers all across the world in a way that's responsible and keeps us all moving along in a productive society that is safe, that has a thriving economy, that that diminishes violence and exclusion while ensuring that people all across the world feel safe, and specifically in the country that we live in. And it seems like the hardest of things. I've said a lot there, talked a bunch. I want to stop here at least and give you the charity thoughts or reflections that you've got.
Yeah.
We'll go from there.
Okay. So one thing I think would be interesting to just kind of talk about first when it comes to Mormonism and when it comes to this particular experience that you had is to sort of break it down into the two separate value systems and to talk about why your worldview and why this other person's worldview may be so important. So, for example, one of your deep value systems is truth. Like that's a huge, huge thing for you. And you would put truth above the need for
well-being. I would put truth above. In other words, it's more important for us all to have some integrity to how we all interact with each other than to make room for everyone to escape, including myself, from my discomfort or pain that I have to process from the cost of being honest and truthful.
Yeah. And I think, we could talk about, where that sort of originated for you. Maybe some of it came from early upbringing. Some of it came from the trauma that you experienced around the church, around being gaslit, lied to, so on, so forth. But that is like a massive value of yours. And it's up here on the scale of like, what's really important. And, as we were talking earlier today, I was trying to see it from the other side. Like, okay, so, and I don't want to be disrespectful in any way, but this to me seems logical. I've been out of the church since I was 20. The more I reflect on the truth claims of the church, the more obvious it is to me that like, how could anybody believe that? And I don't mean that in a way that anyone who believes it is, I'm not belittling that person, but it's like believing in Santa Claus to me at a certain point. You know what I mean? The truth claims just seem ridiculous. However,
it might be true. Again, it could be true in some way that you and I cannot make sense of. It could be true, but your brain tells you that it is so far into not being true.
Yes.
That it is in your brain is just so it absolutely can't be true. It's untrue.
Yes. So as I'm trying to understand another person who would believe in it, especially someone who's highly educated, somebody who is
super intelligent.
Yes. And who really, really thinks through things in a very logical, factual way.
Yeah. And seems to have a ton of empathy. Again,
yes.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I know I'm interrupting you a bunch.
Yeah.
Because I know this person, empathy, they really have all the good characteristics of a really good human being.
Yeah. Yeah. However, you have to ask the question, why is it so important to this person that their psyche on some level is protecting the need for it to be true? So by blocking out maybe things that seem really obvious and to anybody else, but and this happens to, you've shared a little bit about some of the conversations you've had with different apologists and how they won't go there. They won't specifically state, that it, they won't align with you on obvious facts around the truth claims. And I always go to, well, I wonder, like to me, I can understand from a community level why it's important for them to stay in good standing with the church. From a family level, right? Like just being able to know that you're not shaking your family to to their belief. Maybe some people are trying to protect people from going through a faith crisis. Maybe they see so much value in the structure of the church that to them the truth, that the value system of truth isn't as important as what the value that they get from the church, from the structure of the church, from the community of the church, all of that stuff. And that has to be factored in. And so then again, it's like putting two different value systems against one another. And how do you decide which one is actually the winner? You know what I mean? You can't. People value different things. And so your value system is one of truth, but is that better or more important than somebody who values community or family or, protecting another person from having to go through a difficult time of a faith crisis? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't get the privilege of deciding what is right to act in the world. I have a strong opinion about what is right to act in the world. And in these conversations, I can come up with, just as you laid out, I can come up with 100 reasons. I mean, I know of people who are employed by the church who don't believe it, but are always going to speak in terms of belief in the public sphere, because if they did otherwise, they would lose their job. We know that kids can be kicked out of BYU, and not just be kicked out, but lose all of their credits, all of the work that they put in. They can't just transfer to another school. They have to start over from scratch. BYU takes all of it away if that person loses their faith in public at the university. Not criticize it, not do something that is working against it, just have a public loss of faith and no longer want to proclaim any sort of belief in the church and say, I don't believe. They lose their education. And so I can think of reasons why people have to either pretend. I think some do that. I think for others, it's easy for their brain, because being in the church is so important, it's easy for their brain to accept the less than most rational answer because it bolsters up belief. And I think some people simply want to avoid, for one reason or another, public discourse that outwardly says that the church isn't on solid ground on one issue or another, that it's important to them to protect the entity or to protect their membership, hence protect the entity.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll even say this, like I have had, not being associated with the church for, I don't know, a long time, maybe 30 years almost. I had a moment where I thought about taking my name off the rolls. And I, there was a time when I was really pretty angry about the church and everything. But then I sort of sat with it for a minute and realized, well, what if that offends, my brother who is an active member? What if that hits them hard or brings up something from them that might make them feel worried for me, whatever it is. I understand the basis of belief for Mormons. And so, I understand that if somebody falls away from the church, then there's a fear of that person, not being able to have the same afterlife, whatever it is. And so I thought through that and realized, well, it's not that important for me to take my name off the rolls. I don't really care, but maybe it's more important for my brother. Maybe that's more impactful for him than it is for me. And so I chose not to. I want to talk a little bit too about the other side of it. Why, for example, it's so important to you to continually bring up truth and who that's for. Because, a lot of post-Mormon or a lot of Mormons may look at you and what you're doing and just be like, why can't you just let it lie? Why can't you just if it's not good for you, if it's not helpful, then walk away. Why do you have to keep talking about it? So tell me from your perspective, and I'll share a little bit more of my own personal story around this and why I think it's important what you do too. But who are you doing this for and why?
Yeah, let me start by saying it feels a lot to me like Plato's cave, that analogy, where for years and years and years, the slaves that are in Plato's cave are on the wrong side of the rock, and all they see are the shadows against the wall, because the orchestrators of the experience, the folks who are in charge of deceiving people into misunderstanding their reality are in the back, and they're shining a light over puppets and hand puppets kind of things against the wall, holding up little figures, and so they tell the narrative, and those people, it's all they've ever known. It's all they've ever known, and they're watching the cave wall, and they think this is reality, and they're stuck there for years, stuck there, until one day one of them turns around and realizes that there's a guy behind us holding a light and casting a shadow against the wall, and that's what's really going on. You've been tricked. And when I look back at my journey of being a Mormon and then having doubts, deconstructing the faith, and eventually leaving, having lost belief, I can remember how, let me start off by saying I can name out loud the things that this system took away from me, my ability to make my own free choices about what directions my life went in, because it told me a false perception of reality. And that led to me then making choices without all the accurate information. And I'm really hurt by not having had agency, informed consent, full scope of information to the ability that any of us or systems have the ability to give us, so that I could make my own best choices for where my life went. So early on in this whole process, I'm a believing full-in Latter-day Saint. I'm doing Mormonism as well as anyone. I'm 17-year-old convert who's bishop by 29. But the one fault I had is that I found the history interesting. I took the church seriously, and I wanted to know everything about it. So I start reading and learning. And what I start to encounter when I step outside of the story it tells inside its walls, when I step outside and I just read history for what it is, I start to pick up contradictions. That leads me to learning that I've been lied to, and I have no other better way. I know there are apologists out there who somehow rationalize in their brain that the church isn't lying, the apologists aren't lying, no one lied to you. That's just not true. I was lied to, and I can demonstrate 1,000 times where I was lied to. As I begin to deconstruct things, I start I'm alone. There's nobody in my ward thinking about these things. There's nobody in my stake thinking about these things. I don't have any person that I can go to and say, hey, like, I have these really big, anytime I asked a question that got off the faithful track, there are all these things that are thought-stopping techniques that are said by the other members that you just know internally the conversation is being shut down. This will go nowhere positive. Outside the church, outside of religion, I sit down with somebody across the table at lunch, and I say, hey, man, can I talk to you? I've got some things going on in my life that I can't make sense of. Will you help me? And you relay all of those problems, and that person meets you where you are, and they help you process, think about, talk about the issue so that you can get a better hold on reality, expand your awareness of information, gather in other people's life experiences so that you can make the best decision about how you're going to do this thing. Well, in Mormonism, nobody gives you that. Your ward members say things like just have faith, which is just shutting it down. This isn't about let's go over the data and let's see what the most rational conclusion is. No. In spite of that, let's just have faith. Let's have faith is in response to things are not adding up. It's the reason we say it. Whatever you respond with, let's have faith, whatever came before that is already indicating you are not comfortable with that new data point. So you have to go put it on a shelf and just have faith. So as I'm deconstructing and I'm being met everywhere with ward members, in-laws, which are ex-in-laws, which are also family, obviously family members, but also members of the ward as well. and all my friends are in Mormonism. So I can't go to my church members. They indicate by their responses that the only conclusion, if we have a conversation, is to leave it be, or the church is still true somehow. It's not even possible that I'm being told immediately by everyone's reaction that it is not even possible that we could have a conversation where the truth matters enough that that's what we end up trying to get to, whatever that is. It's true, it's not true, but there's no preconceived destination that's either allowed or unallowed. And so as I'm being met by church members, family members, friends, everybody responds to me, Bill, the church not being true is not on the table in any conversation that we have. That is not the goal.
Yeah.
So I have to look elsewhere. Let me share. I know you want to say something. Let me share one more thing, and then I'll let you jump in here. So I go looking elsewhere, and what I find are people like John Dehlin and Mormon stories. And really, he might have been the only one at the beginning. There were a few church talks that pushed back against orthodoxy, so they also felt slightly friendly. But really, it was Mormon stories. And so I start listening to Mormon stories where for the first time in all my time in the church, people are sitting across from each other with the safe space and the time, such as a long-form conversation to do it, where the conversation is designed to inform the audience in such a way that they can have more information, more awareness, more understanding of how these things all work together, that they would now have more agency in making decisions for themselves on how they live the church. And so when you say who and why, who is all of us, myself included, who have been lied to, and if or when they step away from the church, they would look back after enough time to process it, to make sense of it. They would look back and go, thank you. I was better off learning the truth and not being in that thing anymore. And I'm grateful that I now have the ability to live my life more honestly and more informed. And then that also answers why, which is my entire goal is to expose Mormonism enough so that every person out there who has any inkling that if the information's in the right place, if it's said the right way, that person will discover for themselves that they've been lied to, that this thing hurt them, if it did, and for a lot it does. And then be able to deconstruct it in a healthy way that gives them the most safe space to process that, and give them the tools and resources to help them be a person who looks back on their life after church membership and goes, oh, I am so glad I figured this out. Thank you for offering this way of articulating information that I picked up on, that connected with me, and it made some difference as one tool in 1,000 tools to figuring this thing out and making sense of it and moving on to a happy, healthy life. And so the who and the why, that's who it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, and I think there's actually even more who's. But I'll say, like, it makes sense to me too why members would shut down any questions. Anytime you shine light on a truth claim that could diminish that being true, you are basically risking the annihilation of the community. If those truth claims are found to be untrue, then what do they have to base the religion on? What do they have to base the community on? That all goes away. So it's incredibly threatening to people who value community and that entire framework of, somebody else is telling me what's true and what's right. There are people that just do better in that kind of a system. But on the opposite side, there are people who are slowly dying in that kind of a system. For you, I think it's been really interesting to hear your experience of it, because you didn't have necessarily a negative experience in the church. You were thriving in the church from the space of it gave you a place to sort of belong. It gave you a place to shine because you were really good at what you did in the church. It helped you develop in different ways, and that was all beneficial to you. When I was in the church, I was slowly dying inside. Like, it was the most toxic place for me at that time in my life. And when I found out the church, well, I wouldn't even say that I found out the church wasn't true. When I had enough of a demonstration that Mormons were the only good people out there, and that maybe there was something out there that I could, go and explore and figure out, I let myself walk away, because I knew how incredibly toxic it was for me. But it still took me a long time to settle my system into believing, like, okay, maybe it really isn't true, because the idea that it was true was terrifying to me, because all of the beliefs about, where I'd end up in the afterlife, I never felt like I could succeed at Mormonism. I never felt like I was going to be good enough to make it in their system. And so I didn't want it to be true. And we were talking earlier today about, I was in my late 20s at some point, and I was doing a meditation, and I had a kind of a strange out-of-body experience. It was just spontaneous. I didn't expect it to happen. I wasn't trying to get anything. But in this sort of out-of-body experience, I felt like I was levitating, and then I kind of found myself in this like tunnel of light, and I felt immense love. It was like a beautiful experience. And at the end of the tunnel of light, I saw a robed man who appeared a lot like Jesus. And as soon as I saw him, I had just come to the conclusion at that point that I didn't think Jesus was, real in the sense that how people believe in him. And I just thought to myself, like, why am I seeing Jesus? I don't even believe in Jesus. And instantly I just came right back into my body. And I remember that experience was actually, even though there was a calm and a sense of love, the other side of it opened up this fear of, oh my God, why did I see Jesus? Like, does that mean Mormonism is true? And I could not handle that being a possibility. So I didn't tell a soul, like, here's this incredible experience that happens to me, and I choose not to talk about it. I suppressed it. My psyche wouldn't let me even play that out, because the fear was so overwhelming, because Mormonism, that belief system, was so toxic for me. And so it took me a long time before I revisited that experience and was able to sort of perceive it through a different lens. But I don't know. So what I'll say is, there are a lot of people that will benefit from you speaking the truth about Mormonism. I didn't learn about some of the history until much, much later. And I would have really appreciated having that information so that I could have used it to support distancing myself from the church. And I think that there are a lot of people out there that have similar stories to me, where the church was incredibly unhealthy for them, but they didn't have enough information to walk away without fear. And so the kind of information that you provide, the way that you speak about it, the things that you highlight, I think are incredibly important for that subset of people. And at the same time, it makes so much sense why there's another group of people who have a completely different value system. I used to find it so fascinating when I would talk to people and get their perception of Mormonism. And for them, God was a gentle, kind, forgiving God. That was not my experience of it. For me, God was like this punishing, terrifying God. And they found so much safety and comfort in the church. And I just was always like flabbergasted by that. But I understand it now. I get that for certain people, that's a safe space. It's a place that offers them a sense of containment and I don't know, a way that they don't have to, I don't know, like a sense of, it's a roadmap, I guess. And Yeah, go ahead. I
I'll,
want to say something.
yeah, I'll say a couple things to what you're saying. First, you mentioned that what was scared you the most was that Mormonism might be true.
Mhm. Yeah.
Not because it adds up, in spite of the fact that it adds up, that your spiritual experience is demonstrating to you that, oh my goodness, my whatever's going on, my brain, the universe, God up in the heavens, something just happened that I experienced as a spiritual experience. And what I saw could be interpreted as a warning sign that you're getting too far off the track, that Mormonism is true and this is Jesus Christ. And
Well, yeah, or that even Jesus was true. And then if Jesus is true, then the whole concept of the atonement is true. And I couldn't even get anywhere near that word. The atonement was like, some people think of that word and it's soft and cozy to them. The atonement to me is terrifying. I don't like that. I don't even like that concept. So yeah, just even having him symbolically show up in that experience was absolutely terrifying to me. And it was connected to my experience with Mormonism.
that Mormonism being true, or Christianity, I mean, again, seeing Jesus doesn't limit it to Mormonism, but Mormonism being true was terrifying because your experience with Mormonism gave your gut on multiple occasions the feeling that something is yucky here, something is gross about this system, that it would do me harm to be forced to be in it. And a spiritual experience essentially can, at least one interpretation that scares the hell out of you is that you're being warned that all of this is true and that you need to be there anyway.
Yeah. And it's almost like the fear of getting pulled back in or gaslit. So I remember, again, this was such an interesting thing for me. My best friend, she was a bishop's daughter, family of 11 kids. I mean, they were highly respected in our community. And they took everything very seriously. And every conference, they would listen all day. They would have a big event, and I would sometimes go over to their house, and I could not stand the tones and the cadence of the speech of all of the leaders of the church. It made me sick to my stomach. I felt big, visceral things inside of me. And there was a part of me, but you're in this community that keeps telling you like, oh, this is so true. And they keep telling you how warm they feel and how wonderful it is and how righteous these leaders are. And it's almost like you have this internal knowing of something that's being contradicted in everybody else that you see. So it was such a weird experience for me. It's almost like being gaslit, but not directly necessarily, because I didn't share with anybody what I felt inside because I knew I couldn't. I knew it wouldn't have been accepted.
So I have a question for you, but I just want to note that what you just expressed is a form of costly signaling. Having everyone, there is a Mormon way of talking. There's a Mormon way of talking behind a pulpit. There's a Mormon way of talking in a classroom. And most of those people then go back into the secular world and they're themselves. And some of them even carry that cadence out into the natural world. And you see it sometimes. And if we all just notice it, there's something a little disturbing when that happens. When someone's using their inside church tone, cadence, voice, vocabulary out in the real world where Mormonism isn't supposed to be in your face that way. But what I wanted to ask you is, you said something about not being able to talk to friends or people, and you indicated on some level that you distrusted, those were all bad people in the world, whereas, these are the Mormons. Do you remember offhand what you said or what you were pointing to, or
what are you asking about, like what led me to finally leave the church? Like when I recognized that there were good people other than Mormons?
It sort of, I thought you said something that indicated that before time, that you didn't feel safe trying to figure this out with people in the world. Was there anything about that? I'm trying to remember offhand.
No, I didn't, I kept everything, all of my doubts, all of my fears, all of my trauma that I felt within the church inside. I didn't share it with another soul. I didn't even share it with, once I started to connect with people who were not Mormon, I still didn't share it. It was for me, unfortunately, bound to a lot of deep shame and trauma. So I kept that really separate.
And I know you did say that you, one of the really big light bulb moments for you is that as you got exposure to humanity outside the church, you went to states outside of Utah and you stayed for some of your time, and you got to interact with human beings who don't have any, many of them who don't have any high demand system behind them manipulating them, and they're just showing up as their brand of human. And I remember, talking to you about this in the past, where you noticed that that signaled to you that people really are good out there, and that Mormonism didn't have a monopoly on good people, and that maybe some of the ways in which humans interact and behave in the outside world might even be a significant improvement over what it is to be a good Mormon.
Yeah, well, I knew that there weren't the same constraints, and I don't even know if I had a name for it, but I just felt an openness and a freedom. And that was when I gave myself permission to disconnect from the church. And then I went on a huge spiritual seeking journey. I started reading other forms of spirituality to try and get other ideas about what would actually be possible. And I leaned into my inner compass. So that's when I started to be able to kind of connect with things that felt really good and nourishing and supportive to me rather than terrifying. Because that's all I felt in Mormonism was fear.
Yeah.
And yeah, but to get, I'm sharing my story just to give an explanation or to sort of showcase what you do is for and why it's important that you speak the way that you speak. And I don't know if, I don't know how nuanced all Mormons can be. I think that there are some people that can be very nuanced about it and can recognize that Mormonism may not be for everyone. I know the older brand of Mormonism was Mormonism should be for everyone, and everyone who does not have Mormonism in their life is a lost soul. But I feel like that's kind of starting to change, and there seems to be a lot more members who can have a more nuanced perspective of that, which allows for there to be a reality that some people do well in Mormonism and some people do not. And also from the other side, from people that are post-Mormons, people who didn't do well in that system, can also look at the people who are still in the system and recognize that for them, that has value, that it's meaningful in their life, and it supports them having a better life than they might without it. And that's kind of the direction I wanted to go in this conversation in general when it talks about, going into politics, which I don't know that I want to get into that right now. I want to sort of maybe stay focused on this conversation, and then maybe we can expand on that in another one. But do you have anything else you want to add to sort of that perspective?
Yeah, you spoke to the idea that Mormonism, on some level, whether it's the butts in the seats in the pews, it's just the lay members, it's just the average member of the church who's softening up and making room for their family, friends, strangers to live out their expression of humanity outside of the church, or not to the degree in the church that they would personally judge as being the right way, and leaving room that person can express themselves the way they want to, and that there's a certain kind of judgment that is then held back.
Yeah.
But
and
go ahead.
I also want to point out one thing. I don't know how you feel about this, but the gentleman you had on last night who had some feelings about your interaction, I want to comment on the fact that this person had a spouse who'd left the church, who was not Mormon. And this person deeply valued the ability to have a soft conversation, a deeply nuanced conversation that gave them space to still believe and walk within that system, but also, and to this person's credit, give other people space to not be part of it. And so I just want to acknowledge that, and I don't know, and give that person some credit, but at the same time, highlight that the reason why it is so incredibly important for you to be a hardline questioner is because of your value system, which is deeply tied to giving people truth. And the fear or the belief, and whether this is true or not, I don't know. Again, we've had these conversations where I feel like people who really need to get out of the church are going to find the people that are going to give them the information to get out of the church. They're going to be seeking that. They're going to be hearing your voice, and it's going to be received well. People,
but because others that they love are still blinded by the programming of the church, the path out might come with a lot of unnecessary trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It might come with some additional instances of abuse that would not have occurred if the church didn't have such a cancerous hold on how our interactions should go, rather than the way our intuitive gut tells us we should respond to things.
So you feel like if you were to be able to question an apologist or someone you perceive as an apologist, and they were to fully, openly admit what seems quite obvious, that would prevent someone who is in that delicate position of lingering in a system that continued to harm them.
I think that believers in the faith look for their touchstones of people they trust to both maintain optimism for faith while also giving them something that says, I dealt with that issue. I dealt with whatever that concern was that my son, my daughter, my father-in-law, my uncle present, whatever it is. And if the voices on that side of things, if what we've sort of created a label calling neo-apologists, they're empathetic, they are soft-spoken, they know the issues and know the ins and outs of them to the degree that they are acknowledging them far beyond any of the traditional apologists in the church. There are people leaning on church leader talks that seem to approach addressing these issues, but are so carefully crafted. And it's my belief that if we all were just honest about the good and the bad, if those touchstone people, the people that people trust, the church leader or the neo-apologist, if those people would just be honest, they would add in ways that, by the way, this is the other side of the conversation. There are induced harms that are not my priority. And someone could be defending that harm from being done. And that for them would be important and just as important to them as my priorities. But they also choose to prioritize theirs over the ones I have.
Yeah.
In terms of who needs helped here, who needs protected here, who needs comforted here. And so back to your question, if the people who were touchstones trusted by the believers would just tell the truth the way I prioritize it, there are definitive people that I try to help every day who would have the amount of trauma incurred upon them be reduced significantly.
Are there any people on the opposite side of that who would endure trauma from having their faith shaken?
Yeah.
in a system that may have really held and supported them through the rest of their life.
Yeah, but this goes back to, I value truth at the expense of well-being. That your pain to maintain a deception is not worth getting away from that in order to have this person who would benefit, their pain would go away with the truth. If their pain goes away with the truth, then your pain staying with a deception, that's your problem. I'm going to side with the truth.
Yeah. Do you think that there's ever a possibility that there could be an offshoot of the church that, kept some of the foundational beliefs, but had a softer, more inclusive, more direct, honest version of itself? Do you think that's possible?
Yeah. One of our denominations of Mormonism is the Community of Christ, who has gone so far to be significantly more inclusive than its religious foundings, significantly more fair and honest and welcoming of debate or questioning or criticism. But then it becomes a church that is slowly dying and certainly not growing, which I don't care about. Mormonism can die. I don't care. In the whole scheme of things, a million religions have come and gone. So what? But Mormonism cares. And so the LDS version of Mormonism doesn't want to concede whatever things it doesn't want to concede. It doesn't do that because at least one reason, and there could be several reasons to protect itself in various ways, but one reason is to protect itself so that it can maintain the people, maintain the money, and continue on into the future. Self-preservation is high up on, I don't want to say Maslow's needs of hierarchy, but it's self-preservation often leads to us making really unhealthy choices about how we treat others.
Yeah.
Anyway, Mormonism practices a lot of self-preservation.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask you, do you think Mormonism is as successful as it is because of what it offers and provides to people? Or do you think because of the degree of demand and control it has?
Yeah. It benefits by the community that it provides. You were mentioning, we were on a hike earlier, and you were talking about how we leave conservative positions, often within religion, and we go out into the world with more inclusive ideology, but less willingness to give or to serve.
Yeah.
And you pointed back that, religion could be all bullshit, but religion also gives us that nudge. We can call it manipulation, but a nudge to step outside of our comfort zone, even for bad reasons, and serve others and give more.
Yeah, and care for others. And it's interesting because I think we're different. I don't know what I am in the Enneagram, but truth is a priority for me, but definitely not as high as it is for you.
Yeah.
Because as someone, I'm a trauma recovery coach, and I've had to go through my own healing journey, and I've recognized that sometimes in order to heal or to find a sense of safety in the world, or to soothe a nervous system that's out of whack, because there's a lot of reality that comes and hits us, in the face all the time. You sometimes have to get creative about how you resolve all of that. And so, these myths that we get through religion and through spirituality are very helpful in bringing a sense of calm and peace and surrender to somebody's nervous system that is so hyperactivated because of all the aggravating reality that hits us. And so sometimes I think that I could definitely value, a myth over truth if it's fundamentally helps a person to live out a better life, live out a more comfortable, less fearful life. I just happen to find the Mormon myth absolutely terrifying. So it doesn't bring me any sense of calm, but there are others that do. So I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I find it really fun to have conversations with you because we have a lot of differences in value systems, and and we can kind of push against each other. But I think if we can look at people from the other side, whether it's whether you're a believer or not a believer, whether you're a Mormon or not a Mormon, and be able to see it through the lens of value systems and see that we're different humans who need different things to get through this life in a balanced way or whatever, it's easier to humanize each other. It's easier to recognize that I don't think that people are necessarily bad. I think they're just different.
Yeah. And people need, I mean, again, there's such a lot. James Fowler, when he was studying the stages of faith, he was also doing some research at the same time, collecting this data, trying to figure out what percentage of the population ends up sort of cracking through the shell and entering some deeper stage of cognitive development. And in him expressing his ideas, it was that very few people, it was a little more, I think, in Europe than the US, but it's a really small percentage of human beings who kind of break open to complexity and non-binary, non-dualistic thinking. And he pointed out that the rest of the population really needed the structure. Mm-hmm. They really needed the rules to be explained, what get the answers for heaven and hell, know where the lines are, because they would really struggle to both make sense of the world around them and at times to make good choices about how to act in the world without having some bearded man in the sky over them telling them what it is that they needed to do. And so nihilism, folks express that when they have the dark night of the soul, and often long after, they experience this thing called nihilism, where people just feel the ultimate meaninglessness and perhaps loneliness too attached to that where none of it matters, none of it means anything, and why even bother? People, a large chunk of it, religion is I've told you this before, religion is a tool or technology that has been designed over millions of years that helps us shore ourselves up as a society in a way that is productive for the tribe's survival.
Yeah. And this is just a observation. I don't know how true this is, but I think it's interesting because people have different levels of sort of containment. So the ability to sort of hold containment around challenges and difficulties. Some people can completely spin out of control and can go right into panic, and they have nothing to sort of ground them into almost like being able to compartmentalize things that are scary or overwhelming or whatever. And so religion can offer a sense of containment for people who can't do that themselves. And I also think that one of the ways that, like, a person, if I'm working with a client and I'm trying to support them into developing more self-containment or whatever that is, this is usually done through learning to have more self-connection and self-attunement, learning to understand what your needs are and responding to your own needs, and building more self-regulatory capacity. And for people who don't have that, it's easier to lean on a thing outside of them. I also think that I wrote a post about this last week after the stuff that happened with Charlie Kirk, just talking about the difference in a person's sense of locus of control. You have some people who have a very internal locus of control where they feel like they have, it's their choices that make a difference in what happens in the outcome. They have some sense of control over what happens to them. And then there are people who have a more external locus of control who believe that things outside of them determine what happens to them. And really, a healthy person has a balance of of those two, understanding that some things are out of your control, some things are within your control. But my point is that for people who don't have the ability to create their own sense of containment, to ground themselves, to feel like they can have a place to return to of safety, of surrender, of trust within their own system, to be able to respond to their own needs in a healthy way, sometimes they need to rely on something outside of them to provide that to them. And I think that that's part of what religious or any kind of organizational structure does for people. And that doesn't make people wrong. I think we all just have different capacity for that. And I have some clients that I work with that never seem to be able to develop that. And I even think that there's some connection to attachment style. That's a whole thing to sort of explore. But I just think it's interesting. And I think that, again, creating space for people to be who they are and having a deeper understanding of maybe why helps to humanize everybody. It helps us to get to a place of like, okay, to each their own. And of course that's sort of the place I wish people would get to allow people to have the things that support them without thinking that the thing that supports them needs to be for everyone, right? Secularism doesn't need to be for everyone, neither does religion. We can allow people to have whatever works for them.
Yeah. Where this conversation I think will end is around how to balance this tension where two people come to a moment where they're bumping into each other. They're both are getting hurt by the other or triggered by the other. And both are just pleading for the other person to meet them where they are, right? Mm-hmm. And yet both have a truth that's truly true. It's a real expression of that form of humanity. And it really is good, seeking to do good in the world, but where it's needing the good to be done might be different than where the other person does. I think also there's past experiences. One of the things that definitely plays into this is that I've had 100 experiences before this moment with 100 people who I wished and wanted would just be straightforward with me as we talk about the issue in Mormonism.
Yeah.
And those 100 other people, maybe it's more than that, but those 100 other people all made it clear that, again, discussing this in a way that I could gain enough information that whether Mormonism was true or not, that I had the optimal chance at figuring it out, and they avoided that, has me going into any given situation in the here and now, bringing all that history with me and going, here we go again. Here's another game being played. Here's another person who's obfuscating and hiding and creating mental gymnastics and doing a deflection here and, making some analogy that isn't apples to apples. And I've run into it so many times. And yet, bringing history with us into this moment's interaction is going to already have us jaded in such a way that we're not going to give the optimal opportunity for this conversation to be different.
Yeah.
And it was Thomas McConkie who once shared a thought with me that said, he said, when I go into a conversation and I'm aware and present and my best self, I'll notice the trigger, and it's like I have a basin full of water that's all that history. And I'll just dump it out and start in this moment, in this interaction with an empty basin.
Yeah.
And on a Buddhist thought process, thinking about things, that's such a cool idea. But being present enough to operate that way in a moment when you're triggered, especially on the front half of life or just as you're sort of awakening to complexity, is near impossible, if not impossible.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'll just say then, here we are back to where we started, which is there's this moment in time where there's two people coming to a conversation with different values and history, expectations, different traumas. And they're both, and I don't mean fighting as in like argumentative, although this in particular instance, I was argumentative, but fighting for their truth to be honored, validated, hoping to be met in a space that acknowledged the way they want the world to look and work.
Mhm.
And to figure out how we all create moments where we are awakened enough that we can, even if we disagree, that we can understand that the other person has a truth on their side too, that they have needs, they have ways in which they want the world to look so that they can get the safety or the validation or whatever it is that they need, and to sit in these conversations just as we have them and be aware that that's happening.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say is it possible? Is it possible to continue to offer truth? And just in the way that you do, you put it out there, and knowing that the people who are ready for it, who are ready to sort of receive it, are going to have it. It's going to emancipate them in a way that makes their lives richer, fuller, better overall. And that you don't have to control every other aspect of the people who continue to perpetuate truth claims that aren't real.
Give me an example of a way in which you could see that being done that would be different.
Are you sure you want this? Okay, so if an apologist comes on your show and they can't answer, they're deflecting, they're like, okay, it is what it is. Because they are maybe coming to the place of, wow, there's something about this person. This is that whatever they're valuing something to such a degree that they need to, they can't come to this truth. They can't state it out loud. They can't, their psyche's not allowing them to, because of a whole bunch of other things that they find more valuable than the truth. And it's not, again, it has no bearing on whether it's true or not. It's a matter of this person can't say it out loud because of so many other factors. And what if it's okay? Because everybody else who comes to your show can see it. You know what I mean? It's there to be seen. And so in that moment, is it possible to value humanity more than truth?
Yeah. So I'm really glad you brought this up. I'm well aware that not just you, that there are lots of folks out there whose opinions I respect, who would say exactly what you said. They would say that, Bill, you could accomplish everything you're already accomplishing without any sarcasm, without any aggressiveness, without any snarkiness. And there almost certainly is a degree of truth to that, that I can clearly see that others show up that way, and that's how they handle the world. And I respect and think that is an incredible way to show up in the world. I have, I'll start by saying I have my own triggers that are my work to do to overcome that, but it's not the only part that plays out here. I've got a part of me that truly feels like the more stark the divide you create between the bullshit you're trying to be fed, someone's trying to feed you, and reality as it really is, that there are ways in which you can interact in a situation so as to highlight the extremely stark divide. And that in doing so, you make it possible for more people to see the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I do think there's a genuine value in letting the apologist know, I saw what you did there. You didn't get that past me, because I think that feedback over and over does cause someone to shift and change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's valid. I think that's totally valid. So yeah, I like that you shared that perspective.
All right. So, but I agree with you. I definitely have work to do there. And that work would almost certainly impact my showing up in a way that is less abrasive.
Yeah. And I think we need pushers, and I think we need caregivers, and I think we need all the things. And again, our different approaches to this and other people's different approaches to this are going to be fundamentally based on their value systems.
Yeah.
And so I value softness and attunement and holding somebody's tenderness. And I see it. I that's something that I'm able to spot really easily. And I think for you, again, it's that whole concept of truth and being able to illustrate to somebody when truth is being bent in a way that can be deceiving. And you've fallen for it in your life, and you want to be able to highlight, hey, look, this is where it's happening again. Even if it costs hurting someone's feelings or not holding them in a tender space. So I get it, and I do think that there's value in that, and you know what I mean. There's all kinds of different people that show up in all kinds of different ways, and we need sometimes harder aspects and softer aspects. So
yeah. For me, it's two things. So it is one that I value truth. So if I come to a situation, whoever, again, these are just traditionally the situations I come to. There is a person or a group or just the concept of a segment of the population in the church who they use methods of deception and carefully craft words so as to stay away from having the conversation that actually points at the problem and why it doesn't add up for at least some people. Mm-hmm. And in the whoever that person or group or system of people, I'm always going to come to that situation like the truth matters. You're not going to bullshit me. The truth matters. But the other side of it too is that there is a person, a group of people, or the idea of a segment of the population in the church who would be less harmed if there wasn't the deception and manipulation. Mm-hmm. And for them, I'm aware of them in these experiences too. And I'm experiencing the other things that you just said, which are the empathy, the compassion, the justice warrior who wants to, at all costs, reduce their harm.
Yeah.
And it's not, again, it's not my job to, it's an arrogant thing to sit here and go, I'm the protector. I'm the person that they need. Bullshit. I just happen to be the person at this moment doing this thing that does carry that out to some extent, but there's no need to be arrogant and say you're the protector, but I feel like I'm protecting them.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say this. So people who identify as a justice warrior on whatever level tend to hold on to a larger perspective. And so your job isn't in this one moment with this one person. Your job is protecting people outside of this conversation in a different way.
Born yet 20 years from now, they're the people who will be hurt by the bullshit started in 1820, and it won't end for 1,000 more years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you have these conversations out loud, and when you're protecting this group and that person's using deception in order to maintain something that is hurting these people, it comes out as like, oh no, you didn't, you son of a bitch.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think how it can be perceived sometimes is, oh, look at his ego. There's his ego. He just has to, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, I get it. I understand that.
Not that there isn't some ego. That would be bullshit too. Of course there is. Of course there's a bit of pride that I'm the guy who gets to do this thing. But no, you're not going to hurt these people. Not on my watch. There is a wanting to protect people. And often when I have these interactions on social media, for instance, I'll put something, the apologist says something, and if people are reading, they would go, I wonder if they're trying to fight for who's, fight over who's right. And that maybe I'm trying to change their mind, that I'm trying to get Brian Hales to side with me. I've been in this long enough to know I am certainly not going to change any of their minds. The ones that see themselves as watchmen on the hill, the ones who are defending the church and they see that as their job. I'm not going to change their minds. But people are reading that dialogue. People see the contrasting perspectives. People see which side will walk them through the documents and show them every piece and let them ask whatever damn question they want. And I will just tell you my truth, and I will support that there are truths on the other side that may have validity too. I'm not going to hide anything from you. I'm not going to keep sources from you. I'm going to talk openly with you. To be the person who does that, there's this stark difference than the person who is withholding, obfuscating. And if people can see just forget religion and the specifics and the data points, if people can see that one side is playing the game this way and the other side is playing the game that way and create as stark of a difference as possible, I hope, I don't know if it's true, I don't have the data, I hope that my style of doing it prompts a number of people to wake up to it than would have woken up if I wasn't around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'll end this. I mean, you can say whatever. I'll end this by saying to anybody I disagree with out there, I do get that you have your own reasons, your own values, your own perspectives. But I also, to some degree, I can't not be who I am and prioritize what I prioritize, value what I value, and work to reduce harm in the world the way I think is best. And I don't think we can avoid, we can soften it, but I don't think we can avoid that we're going to naturally bump into each other when the person on the other side disagrees with us on some part that is really important to both of us. Any final thoughts from you?
No, but I've enjoyed this conversation, and I think things are not always what we think they are. I think that it is important to consider the person on the other side and what motivates them and why, and to look at it from a place of values, not just I don't know. Yeah, we end up thinking that, somebody who values the church somehow supports harming other people, but that's not really the true motivation at all. Every human being is trying to live in a very uncomfortable, uncertain world, utilizing the tools that they have at their disposal and just really trying to live life the best that they can. And so, when we're able to sort of peek behind the curtain, so to speak, and understand what's really driving people, I think it's a lot easier to be tolerant, to be open to conversation, to allow people to do what they do, and without feeling like we have to interrupt it or force them to do what we do it our way. And we're going to continue to have more of these conversations. We're going to dive into a lot of sort of controversial topics, but from the same perspective of really being able to see what's behind it, what I don't know, and hopefully give people space to see it in a different way. And yeah.
We're all fragile on something. We all have an inner child that got hurt in some serious way around something. And inside an unhealthy system, there are lots of ways in which the system makes it so that if you step away from this tribe, it doesn't just mean your relationship with belief in a particular religion. It might mean the most important relationships to you in some part of your life or another. And people who believe, you might judge them as not being concerned about the harm being done. And you might not be aware that it could be the harm closest to them that they're trying to prevent. So with that, I think we had a great conversation today. And I hope that sometime soon we'll revisit this kind of dialogue around some of these other issues that we want to talk about. I think this is a great setup for the kind of a series of conversations. You and I have talked about a multitude of topics that it would be interesting to just talk out what both sides are experiencing and feeling so that the other side can humanize them.
Thanks for tuning in to the Almost Awakened podcast. For more tools, resources, and real talk about conscious living, visit almostawakened.org. That's almostawakened.org, your resource for waking up